The GM was named Mario, and a couple other players. One was Francesco, and I'm trying to remember the other guy. Well, we started playing, and briefly, we had Lady Violet, who was a fox witchy lady at the court at Camelot, and so she was not like a huge princess or anything, but she was one of Guinevere's courtly love ladies to some extent, but again a little bit very much on the shadowy side. So that's Lady Violet, and then we also had and she had a network of servants, like she was in on all the servant news, and she could kind of pull some strings to know what was happening or get stuff done. Then we had, Sir Gelion, who was a gorilla, and was played very much as a headstrong, rather likable bruiser, who also had kind of a deep well of kind of irrational passion, and this struck me as very Arthurian in the Mallory tradition, where the knights are badasses and they're a little boisterous, and you kind of don't know if things are going to go off the handle. Well, okay. Then there was me playing Gunther, who was a goat and a divinity student, wanted to be a priest, and I got kind of wicked here, and I said he was very devout and very studious and learned about all the ins and outs, but he also was so incredibly pragmatic and so good at twisting the letter of the morality that he could basically say anything is okay. He didn't even know he was doing it. He's really, he's this very pious person, but everybody goes to him for solutions because, as we determined in a bit, I didn't say this at the outset, but everybody comes to Gunther for solutions because he'll figure out a way for you to get what you want, and God will be okay with it. So I was, he's a bit of a badass, not so much of a knight, but he traveled with the knights and knew enough how to fight and stuff. So cool. Well, we made these characters, and there's some pretty interesting features. One of the difficulties in a game like The Pool or The Questing Beast is the knowledge of what it takes in terms of backstory. I've always been something of an advocate for more backstory in these games rather than less. And I mean prepared backstory. There's sort of a belief that because these are sort of hip and flip and easy resolution and then I get to talk kind of games, that you must be making the story in terms of backstory up as you go. There's sort of this belief that we're all in consensus storytelling mode. Just, and there's a castle over the next rise, or, so that means that guy's been hunting me all along, or, and just not knowing a thing before you sit down to play for anybody. This isn't really the way I read the games, and it doesn't seem to match with what James says when I talked to him a lot about this. He kind of had much more in mind of, I got a map, and I got my, bad guys, I got plots to uncover, I got, there's stuff going on. And, you don't get, we're not just sort of freebasing the story all the way through. So again, I kept my app shut, and it seemed kind of interesting in the Questing Beast of trying to say, are we traversing a set of conflicts, or are we kind of riffing on what on earth we might be doing in the first place, in terms of content, of all the content, not just plot outcomes. And it had a bit of that. And I could definitely see that there were starts and stops. The GM kind of was wondering, do I make them do this? I have a guided event. I can make them go places. What will be there? I threw this in a bit ago. How do I, bring it in now? And we were all kind of helping with this. This was much more in the sort of improv spirit of something that somebody threw in a bit ago. Another person would pick up and say, okay, it matters now. Oh, so that's what they were doing here. That kind of thing. And it's functional. It wouldn't be my preference for either game, but it works better in the Questing Beast than it does in the pool, because of the weight of who talks is far more structured in this game. And so in sum, we ended up with a pretty interesting way for the characters to all find their priorities in one spot. The GM had to do some footwork. I'm not saying it was deceptive. I mean, just saying this is cognitively. He had to do some footwork to figure out how it could be that we would all be coping with some problem. But we did, and it was kind of fun. We had interesting, passionate love story for Sir Galeon, who fortunately got talked out of it at the last minute, or at least to put it aside. And Lady Violet turned out to be, a bit of a badass with her magic, which was cool. There was a spider sorcerer. That made me happy. And so we ended up with a pretty fun adventure. I think there was at least one or two threads that turned out to be unknown. We never did figure out, why the one girlfriend got yanked out of her chamber and brought to this place. Or I don't think certain things ever really made sense here and there, but the standards for such things don't have to be very high. Now, the system itself is really what I want to focus on. Did it work? Did we get where did things get places and people get into things because of the way the rules work? And I'd have to say yes, although I think it needs more weight in prep for that to really take on great force. We did not see what I disliked from the text itself, which is the business of, well, whatever the dice say, that has to do with who talks and says what happens, and we don't really have to concern ourselves with the resolution of what was just happening. But even though there is some language about that in the rules, if you actually look at the resolution rules, which is where our attention was focused, it really is about success and failure and the guided event. So whenever the ones or the sixes came up, everybody, without any reminders or, splaining on my part, everybody took them seriously. And it was a success or a failure of what was just happening. With that in mind, for the ones and the sixes and then the guided event, okay, that can be the exception. We can do it the other way, for the guided event, and that's a GM thing. I was actually really happy with that. It ended up being very compelling. The rolls got very tense. We got to see a couple of those joyous moments where you roll a whole handful of gambled pool dice into this, and of course you fail, and they all go to hell in a handbasket. And so we had a few people, with pools, crashing into the wall and stuff like that. And that's contrary to all fears that anyone has from reading these games. No, it's not a disaster when you lose a bunch of dice from your pool. You'll be fine. The game will, the system handles that, and it's important, but it's not this thing where all of a sudden you're just all out and sit there woefully. That interests me. Thinking back on the early days of the Forge, that did seem to be kind of the huge fear that everyone had for any system and any play, which was that if X happens, oh no, I'll be sitting there woefully. I'll be out. I'll be out of gas. I'll be out of points. I'll be out of, bonuses. I'll be out of this or that. And I'll just sit here, while you play. Well, there's a huge fear about that back then. really informed a lot of the discussions in retrospect, and a lot of that centered around these two games. And again, I was the voice in the wilderness saying the system's more robust than that, and we saw that here as well. So that was pretty cool. Thanks for listening. I believe, oh, the pool is certainly still available, and I believe that the Questing Beast might be. I'll check on that and find out. Thanks.